today we are doing how to make French press the best way. So what we're looking for when we're making French press is a really amazing, good cup of coffee that isn't super sludgy and doesn't have a bunch of that mud and grinds in the bottom of your cup, which is a common problem people have with the French press. Now, the French press is a very common home method because it's something that is fairly simple to use. We're going to do a couple extra steps that will really enhance the amazing things that the French press can bring out in your coffee. One of those things is that it can create a much fuller body of coffee as opposed to a drip or pour method, because the coffee sits with the water in the French press instead of just having the water pass through it. This saturation basically more evenly extracts the coffee from, or the flavors from the coffee. So if you have ever made a Chemex or a pour over, it's a much more involved process because getting an even extraction is a lot harder than, say, with a French press. And a French press is going to give you a stronger coffee than a pour over. And so all you're going to need is your French press, a cup, some ground coffee, and some boiled water. Now, to really make sure you're getting a good cup of coffee, you want to make sure that your coffee is fresh, that it's freshly roasted. So if you buy from Gum Barrel, it will always show up at your house, or if you buy it at the store, it will always be freshly roasted. And you want to make sure it's freshly ground. So I'll grind it right as I'm making it, or right as my water is reaching a boil. And basically, you want your water to either be just boiled or within 30 to 45 seconds of being boiled. People debate the exact temperature of coffee, but basically the way the chemistry works is that when you want your water to be really hot, because that extra energy in the chemical reaction making the coffee actually brings out a lot more flavors and more fully extracts the coffee. But if your water is too hot, that's not a good thing either. And so what you want to do is, I would recommend starting between 60 to 70 grams of coffee for every liter of water that you're using. So the reason I'm saying 60 to 70 grams per liter is because from there it's very easy to break it down. So making 250 milliliters, that's going to be a fourth of 60. So 60 to 70 grams per liter of water is what I would recommend, but you can play with it however you want. You can try adding more coffee, try doing less, and really kind of make that part your own. But that's a good starting point for most people. And so what you want is make sure, just like in the mocha pot, that your French press is very clean. You can see all the way through the glass on the bottom on this one. The filter is super clean. You want to make sure you clean it every single time you use it right away so that stuff doesn't build up. Because as stuff builds up, it creates a more stale taste and makes it taste more bitter when you drink it. So this water is freshly boiled, and I've already measured out my coffee. Now, a lot of people, it says use a coarse grind for your French press, and what you want is something more on the lines of medium. So if you can see, which it is hard to see, this is a more medium grind, so it's not truly coarse. It's more like somewhere between large pieces of sand and small pebbles. So it's not a coarse grind, and it's not as fine as, say, a drip coffee or a pour over coffee setup. So what you're going to do is you're just going to add your coffee, and you're going to add your water. Now what you do is you want to put just enough water that it evenly coats the coffee, and that it puts just enough where the coffee is just wet and it's saturated, but it's not floating in a bunch of water. And if it's floating in water, that's fine, but it's something at this stage, less is more. So we're going to wait about 40 seconds while the coffee does what's called blooming. So what is blooming? So when coffee blooms, it's when you add some of the water and you let it sit. And basically, if it's really fresh, you'll see a bunch of bubbles build up, and you can see what's called a creamer, which is similar to an espresso. If you ever get a fresh shot of espresso from a cafe and you see that kind of foam on top, that will actually build up during the bloom if you have a very fresh coffee or a lot of bubbles. So we're using the gum barrel espresso blend, and you can see that, or you can't see, but there's a lot of bubbles being built up right now on top of the coffee because it is so fresh. And so what's happening is a bunch of CO2 is being released. So there's a lot of chemical reactions and a lot of chemistry when you get into the finer parts of coffee, and part of that during the bloom is that CO2 being released. And when you let it bloom, it basically means that you'll have a much smoother, less bitter cup of coffee as opposed to if you didn't bloom the coffee. And so now that it's bloomed, what we're going to do is we're going to add the rest of our water. So I'm personally turning the French press as I go to just really increase that even distribution, but it's something that you definitely don't have to do. And so now we're going to let it sit. Now you're going to let it sit for about 4 to 4.5 minutes. And what you're going to want to do after those 4.5 minutes. Okay, and so at this point we've been here for 4.5 minutes, so the coffee and the water have been able to interact a lot and really extract a lot of those amazing flavors, vitamins, nutrients, all that good stuff from coffee. And if you guys want a more in-depth video about kind of what's actually in coffee and the health benefits of coffee, make sure you send a comment saying that. I'd love to do a more in-depth breakdown of some of the benefits of drinking coffee. So what we're going to do is you can use a tablespoon, a butter knife, anything you want, a stir stick. I have this extra long handled coffee scoop, and I'm using the handle to stir up the coffee. So this 4.5 minute mark. You'll notice that a lot of the grinds start to build up on top of the coffee, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the handle or whatever you're stirring with, and we're just going to break it up. We're just going to stir the coffee a couple times, agitate it for about maybe 10 seconds. And so we're just going to stir it, and this remixes all of that coffee with the water, really ensuring that it's extracted fully, that every part of that coffee is being interacted with. And what's going to happen is now we're going to sit for another 4 to 4.5 minutes. And that's where a lot of people, they're like, French press takes about 10 minutes, because at this point it's really hard to sit here because it's like I already brewed the coffee. You can drink this right now. However, if you wait another 4 minutes, it's going to be a lot better because there's going to be more interaction, more extraction. It's going to taste a heck of a lot better. And since we are using hot water, even if I did press this now, the coffee would be too hot to drink. So instead of pressing it now, sitting with a too hot cup of coffee, let it sit in here longer, and you'll end up with a better tasting coffee. It does take an extra couple of minutes. And for me, if I'm busy in the morning and I'm using the French press, I'll kind of in the 4.5 minute segments where I'm just letting the magic happen, that's when I'd be, doing chores, making breakfast, doing whatever. So it is something that it does take time, but it's not an overly interactive experience. And so you can do other things while you're making French press. And so while we are waiting for the next step, I'm just going to go over a couple other kind of tips and tricks about the French press. Now, French press is such an amazing option because it is so affordable. It's also something that comes in various shapes and sizes. You can buy travel coffee mugs that have a built-in plunger for a French press. You can get small 1-cup French presses if you travel a lot. This is one of the larger ones. It's 8 cups. and there's a lot of different kinds of French presses you can get. If you are in the market for a French press, I'd recommend buying from a company called Bodum, B-O-D-U-M. Now, Bodum is an amazing go-to coffee company, especially for French press. They have pretty good grinders, especially for what their grinders are and the price range that you find them in. I find their grinders really good too, but they are the best French press you can get. And that's something where it might cost $3 more, but that $3 makes a surprising amount of difference. So if you are buying a French press, buy Bodum. Now, French press is a thing that a lot of people, it takes playing with for the grind. The grind of coffee makes way more difference than most people think as far as how it tastes. If you grind it too fine, it's going to be really bitter, really acidic, and it's not going to taste as well. And if it's too coarse, if it's underground, you don't grind it enough, your coffee is going to come out watery, under-extracted, and it's going to taste horrible. And you don't want horrible tasting coffee. So make sure that you play around and get your grind size just right. Again, you're not looking for a truly coarse grind like a lot of people say. It's more medium coarse. And if you want to know what a medium coarse looks like, just look up medium coarse ground coffee. But a medium coarse grind is going to be your best bet. And one of the best go-tos that you can use no matter what method you're using is look at your strainer, look at your filter, and especially with a mesh filter, like on these plunge methods, you can kind of make out just how big these gaps are. And so if you're confident in yourself, you can kind of eyeball your grind to match that filter, and you want to get it just fine enough, where it's as fine as you can get it without it all going through the filter. And French press is also a very versatile coffee making method because you can use it to do things like froth milk, which I explained in our How to Make a Latte at Home with a mocha pot. You can use a French press to froth your milk at home you just fill it with however much milk you want. You just want to make sure that it's a substantial amount, so that it can fully submerge your filter in it. You don't want to just skim the bottom, but what I'd recommend if you are frothing your milk with a French press is do 5 full plunges all the way out of the milk and all the way to the bottom, 5 full plunges, and then about 20 to 25 smaller plunges where you're coming just to where your milk, the top of the milk is, so it's almost breaking out of the milk, but it's not, and then all the way to the bottom, then just almost breaking out of the milk, and do that about 20 to 25 times, and that's going to give you a really good, silky, smooth milk. If a latte cappuccino style beverage is your personal choice. And that's one of the reasons French press is such a great option for home coffee brewing, is it's not overly complicated, especially if you watch this video. It's going to give you a really good, strong tasting, full-bodied, bold coffee that really complements all the amazing things about Gun Barrel's coffee. It's something that you can use lighter roasts on. I'd recommend a medium dark or espresso. A light roast, it just isn't brought out as well. There's, again, other things. If you are good at making pour over or Chemex or V60 coffee, that's where a light roast will show up the best. Light roast, if you really fill that basket on a mocha pot, can come out of the mocha pot tasting really well or really good. And French press is kind of the same thing as that mocha pot, where when you think about it, those darker roasts are going to be significantly better in a French press or a mocha pot than a dark roast will in a pour over. But a light roast is versatile, albeit a more expensive roast of coffee for kind of what you're looking at as far as how you make it. And so if you are going to buy one way to make coffee, I think French press is a very viable option that you should be considering. It's very similar to a mocha pot. It's around $20 for a good French press, and that is something that is worth investing. And I'd also make sure that you get a glass French press. I've tried ones that are different materials, and glass tastes the best. You can see what's happening, it looks the best, and it's just your best bet. Because for this next step that we are going to do now, it's kind of essential to have glass. You can do it without glass, but it's a lot easier with glass. So what's happened now is that all of that sediment that had built up on top of the coffee, when we stirred it and let it sit more, has now sunk into the bottom of the French press. So that's a good thing, because when it's all on top, that's when a lot of it can slip past anything in the French press, where as the French press gets older, if you don't take care of it, things can happen to the filter. Or that's another problem with non-glass French presses, like if it's ceramic. The ceramic French press, I've noticed you get a lot more grinds kind of slip past the filter. And so right now, all the sediment and all the coffee is built up on the bottom. And so you're going to put your plunger on, and here's what a lot of people, they don't mess up, but they just don't know better. And I didn't know better for a long time. You don't want to push all the way through. You don't want to compress all that coffee on the bottom, because when you do that, it disturbs all of that sediment, it shakes it up. That's another way where your coffee will taste a little bit muddier, and therefore a little bit more bitter, and you'll get stuff stuck in your teeth. And again, you don't want that. And so what you do instead of pushing it all the way through, because again, all the sediment is built up on the bottom, there's no sediment in coffee here, is you push down the plunger just to the point where it's touching the coffee. Where, if you can see, my plunger is just down that line of the coffee. It's not pushing down on it, and it's not floating above it. It's just on that line. And so what happens is that as all the sediment's built up on the bottom, when we pour the coffee, that sediment's going to stay there as long as you pour it controlled. And then any bigger chunks, anything that does leave the bottom, will get caught and filtered through the filter. Instead of being pushed through, it shakes it up, and that is something that people just push it down and don't think about it, and most tutorials say to push it down. But I guarantee you that if you try it this way without pushing all the way through, it will taste better. And so when we pour it, you can see that a lot of the times when you first pour out of a French press, you'll notice a little bit of mud come out of the coffee, and that's not happening here. It's completely smooth. It's a really beautiful, full looking coffee, which I will be walking up to show you. So you can really see that this is a beautiful dark coffee. It's not as thick as, say, a mocha pot, and it's not as thin as a more pour-over drip or coffee maker. And that's the really beautiful thing about the French press, is it walks that line between mocha pot and a more pour-over, pass-through method of brewing. Now, the cool thing about French press is that a French press gives you a lot of really cool options to play with, because this is a more standard weight of coffee as far as how thick the liquid is, but you can make it even thicker, even thinner, and that's again a spot where you get to play with a French press. And it's not super complicated. If you watch this tutorial, your French press will taste better than any other method. I've tried dozens, and I really hope you enjoy it. Now, if you want to know where to get a good French press, leave a comment. I'll respond with a link. Look at Bodum on Amazon for the best ones. And if you enjoyed this tutorial, if you learned something, make sure you comment and let us know. If you know someone who has a French press or uses a French press or just enjoys coffee, make sure you send this to them, because I guarantee you they will enjoy it too. With that, thank you all for listening. You guys are absolutely amazing, and take care.